Hey, welcome into the Cannabis Man podcast. Thank you for clicking on the show. I am your host, Don Kleppen. Whether it's your first time here or you're a long-time connoisseur like myself, welcome, and I really appreciate you clicking on the show. It's a podcast where we're trying to take a journalistic look at all things cannabis. I like to speak with experts in the space, whether those be entrepreneurs, doctors, researchers, elected or appointed leaders who are making the laws, journalists or reporters who cover what's going on and all that's changing in the cannabis space. Really anybody who is in this very exciting green frontier that we are all witnessing move day by day, closer and closer toward ending the prohibition here in the U.S. and around the world at large. Be sure to rate or review the show if you haven't already. If you're listening to this right now on Spotify or Apple, there's a function there in any podcast platform to leave a rating or a review for the show. And if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you could rate and review this show. There's a lot of podcasts out there, and the rating system is how people know which ones are worth their time. So any ratings or reviews really help me stand out from the crowd. Of course, you can also become a subscriber to the Cannabis Man podcast by scrolling down and clicking on the support the show link. That'll take you to Buzzsprout, and you can sign up and you'll get a thank you email from me as well as your name shouted out in the credits of the next show. Love all my subscribers. I really can't thank you enough for supporting the show. And of course, follow us on social media at C-Man Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. It's the Cannabis Man Podcast Facebook page and YouTube channel. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button if you're listening to this on YouTube. Got a lot to talk with you about today. There is so much happening in the cannabis space right now, all the time, but this month of April in 2024, this is a doozy. We've got the Stoner Eclipse coming up on Monday. 420 this year is obviously the 2-year anniversary of the show. It's also a palindrome. So if you write out that date, 420 2024, it's the same backwards and forwards. And I don't believe that that's ever going to happen again. So certainly worth celebrating that. Took a few extras for that one. And of course, I have an interview with an expert that I'm going to bring you later in the show, as well as get to some news stories and events. And we have had some major news regarding cannabis this week. Germany just partially legalized on Monday. No, that was not April Fool's. And no, you're not just a little too stoned. That actually happened. And I speak a little about that with my guest, as well as kind of dive into what that could mean for cannabis at large over there across the Atlantic from here in the U.S. So strap in, light up, get ready for some high-minded conversation here on the Cannabis Man podcast. Here we go.
This is Tommy Chong, and you're listening to the Cannabis broadcast.
Yeah, that's the stuff right there. Love the theme. I hope you do too. I really appreciate that. Composed and written by my man Yusu Kim, a.k.a. Good Son. I hope you're doing well, Yusu. You can always check out the music that he's got going on Instagram at I Am a Good Son. And let's kick this off properly. If you've heard the show before, you know I'm a big fan of caffeine and cannabis, caffeinabis, if you like. I find myself an aficionado of that combination, and the form that my caffeine typically takes in the morning is coffee. I'm a big fan of coffee, and especially combining that with cannabis. I just find that the dance that those two substances do in my system, I love the way it feels, and that's just something I try and cultivate whenever I possibly can. So I've got some delicious coffee here from my friends at Split Rock Coffee. It's a great company. I like to support them, and if you want to try some for yourself, you could scroll down and click on the Vouch store link in the description notes, and you can order some Split Rock coffee for yourself, support some veterans, and try some delicious coffee at the same time. They will ship it right to your door, and they've got some different options there on the show page, so try it for yourself. Cheers. And in terms of the cannabis, this is actually some weed that I was gifted from a friend of mine who is down in Texas doing some excellent work there. And he was kind enough to send me one of each of a sativa and indica. So I've got the sativa going here. And I'm using something that I've talked about on the show before, and you'll hear a lot more detail about it later as I speak with my guest. But I'm using a thermal extraction device courtesy of our friends at DynaVap. And yes, my guest today is George Brewa, who I've spoken with on the show, founder of DynaVap. He has done so much great work that I really don't think the world has yet realized the importance of in terms of furthering the normalization and the ease and convenience of thermally extracting your cannabis versus burning it, versus combustion devices. We all, anytime, whether you're lighting a joint, whether you're lighting a bowl or a bong or bubbler, or you're doing the concentrates, whatever you're doing, most of the time we are combusting the cannabis and inhaling the smoke from that. Well, as George and I discussed deeply, there are many, many differences between thermal extraction and combustion, and there are actually a few differences between thermal extraction and vaporizing, and we get into those as well. But anyway, I've got some of my friend's weed loaded into the Woodwind from DynaVap here, and so if you haven't used this before, you basically use something like a butane torch or an induction heater or something, just any kind of heat source that'll light up the cap that comes on all the DynaVap pieces. You listen for 2 distinct clicks, and that lets you know that the temperature of the cap and the oven, as George describes it, of your thermal extraction device has reached the right temperature, and it's time to inhale. So here we go, a little cannabis out of the Woodwind to start my day here, hoping wherever you are, you're getting to enjoy some cannabis as well, or just chilling and having a wonderful slice of life on this beautiful day. Cheers. Toasty. Yeah, it's so good. I talk with George, you'll hear later, but I've been loving this Woodwind. I've used cannabis. I've been a smoker for 18 years, and I thought that I would always smoke. I mean, when I do tolerance breaks or when I'm, sort of just taking a break from smoking, if I do edibles or whatever, I'm somebody that's been doing it long enough where I kind of miss the bite of the actual inhale. When you take in that breath of smoke and you kind of feel the little pinch on your lungs, knowing that the cannabis is in there, and then you kind of let it out in that whoosh and just watch the smoke. I have, really come to enjoy that. That's a part of the experience that for me is really meaningful. But as you'll hear in my discussion with George, there are so many quality of life improvements that come from thermal extraction versus combustion, and I have found those lately to be impossible to ignore. So I've been using these DynaVap devices a lot more lately, and I can't help but feel like that would be the same for anybody who's trying these devices. It's really, really great, and you owe it to yourself to try them. Time to get into the News Joint Wrap. That's right. This is a wrap-up of news or events related to cannabis in or around Illinois, and it's all curated for you by IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Think of it as the joint you can hit for all your Illinois cannabis news and reviews. Let's start with a check-in about medical cannabis sales for January and February. The totals hovered for each month around $24 million. Jason Brown of Illinois News Joint highlights the totals out of the Illinois Department of Public Health. They released the first 2 months of the year sales totals. January was $24,338,551.30. February reached $24,427,904.62. Worth noting here that each of those monthly totals was the lowest January and February medical cannabis sales since legalization back in 2020. Jason goes on to break down the specific products that were sold in Illinois dispensaries and a little bit more perspective in terms of monthly sales sales totals. And then some more news regarding the eve of the Eclipse Carnival. As I mentioned earlier, it is the Stoner Eclipse, if you like to call it, solar eclipse on Monday. Right around 2 o'clock Central Time, 3 Eastern, the moon will pass in front of the sun. And the day before that happens, Sunday, the inaugural eve of the Eclipse Cannabis Carnival, a masquerade and cosplay party, that has been moved to the Garden Grove Event Center, which is at 1215 East Walnut Street in Carbondale. Jason notes that this will allow for free parking and better amenities for the event, which runs 3 to 9 p.m. on April 7th. And related to that, the Eclipse Carnival has now set their costume contest schedule. If you're going to go to a masquerade and cosplay party, I think it would behoove you to dress up. It's not a necessity. You will still be let in if you're not wearing a costume, but I recommend it. There'll be prizes awarded for 4 costume categories, including Best Overall Costume, Best Cosplay, Best Masquerade, and Best Couple or Group. So you have a little incentive to dress up. If you don your best costume or masquerade disguise, enter the contest, and you'll have a chance to win a prize packet. The costume contest starts at 6 p.m., and contestants need to be signed up by 5:30. The winner of the best couple or group will be announced first, then best cosplay, then best masquerade, and followed finally by the best overall costume. That'll be announced last. The eve of the Eclipse Cannabis Carnival is free to all adults 21 years or older, but you have to reserve tickets at Event High, and the link to that can be found at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. And then I just want to highlight some of their recent reviews, which include Super Buff Cherry by New Era, Alien DNA by Galaxy Labs, what a great name for flower, and then Smackers by One Day. Black Cherry 1-to-1 CBN Hash Drops by Arise are also reviewed, and there's plenty more reviews as well as perspective, news stories, interviews, and event breakdowns. All of that is available for you at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. Before I get to my interview this week, listener, I want to mention that I'm very excited about the solar eclipse coming up on Monday. I don't know if you're into celestial events very much, but I was fortunate enough to be down in Carbondale back in 2017 when the last solar eclipse came this way, and that was in the path of totality there down in southern Illinois. And I think this eve of the Eclipse Carnival is such a great idea from Illinois News Joint. I think it's going to be such a ton of fun, and I love that there is a place in Illinois that this path of totality is coming by, and I also think it's very cool, even though it's just kind of a nerdy thing, I suppose. Dates, calendar dates are just a construct of humanity. It doesn't really ultimately mean much, but, there is something unique about the fact that this 420 this year, along with this solar eclipse coming in this month of April, this 420 is a palindrome, and I just think that I'm always so geeked out by palindrome words that are spelled the same backwards and forwards, like race car or poop, if you like, for a shorter one. But either way, the numbers of the date for 420 this year read the same backwards and forwards, and I was just looking into it a little bit, and it seems like this is something that may never happen again, as long as humanity stretches forward into the future, and as long as we keep track of time this same way that we do. I don't believe that we're ever going to hit another 420 2024. So I definitely just think that this particular 420, all of them are worth celebrating, certainly, but this one in particular seems to be a little extra special. And so I would keep some extra supply around and definitely enjoy the party, because it's worth it. Life is short. Find reasons to celebrate and go for it. That's what I say. Listener, strap in, because my guest today is definitely a favorite of mine, and you will remember him as well. He's been on the show before, and we had a great conversation about the differences between vaporizers, especially handheld ones, and combustion devices regarding, inhaling cannabis. A lot of people, obviously, for so long have known smoking cannabis, whether it's a joint, a bong, a bubbler, or you get into some of the concentrates with the glass dab rigs and all of that stuff. But my guest today has done some really incredible work to further the ability of us connoisseurs to enjoy handheld cannabis vaporizers. He invented a cap specifically, and it's allowed him to make some different versions of these devices, and they all have a lot of different benefits, and the experience of using them is different. And the company I'm talking about here is DynaVap, and they have a new product out that's available now for you to check out. It's called the M7, and here to talk about the company at large, as well as this new product and combustion versus vaporizing and all things developmental in terms of cannabis and all of this, is one of the friends of the show, George Brewa, founder of DynaVap. Welcome, George.
Good to be here, Don.
Thank you for taking the time, as always. I wanted to bring you on today, George, because I have tried, some of DynaVap's products, obviously. The most recent one that I've got in my hand here that I love is the Woodwind. And it's compared to the first handheld DynaVap vaporizer that I tried. This was it's sort of almost, I want to use the word artistic, because of how the curvature of the actual vape is and how you feel it in your hand, and the weight of it, and how the cap, it sparks and the smoke, the vape flows through. I noticed that I was able to taste the different cannabis strains a little better than I had been with the early version of your product. So I guess we can start just with the work you guys have been doing at DynaVap and talk a little about, if you can, the Woodwind product that you guys have.
This sounds really good, and I'm glad that you seem to think that it's art, because that's actually a pretty good summary in terms of how we like to look at what we do. Sometimes we'll even refer to our products as functional jewelry. I'm a big believer in form follows function. However, it's hard to deny the value of good form. So, provided that we have our function in a good place, well, what remains is for us to play with form. And form doesn't necessarily just mean shape. It can be color, it can be texture, as well as, I'm sure we can come up with a few other descriptors for it.
Right.
And it's the combination of these factors that ends up contributing to the overall feel of the product outside of the function. And for us, it's a really, really important thing, because how else do you really differentiate yourself in the marketplace, right?
And I think, on that note, like, different forms speak to different people. If the function is like the baseline of people using the product, the form is kind of, as we've been saying, it's like the artistic, it's more like the aesthetic appeal aside from the functional side of it. And that, I think, is there throughout our lives. All these things we buy, people buy cars, people buy, houses and boats, whatever, and much smaller things, based on not just the function, but the form, because they find a certain design more pleasing to their tastes. But as we all know, tastes differ among all of us.
And sometimes they differ substantially. And this is why a little bit of variety is really important when it comes to any company's product line, right? You don't want to, in general, be a company that only makes one product one way, because that tends to be very limiting in terms of your addressable market and the likelihood that you're going to find a very close match with a potential customer and tick all the boxes. So change it up a bit, have a few different variations. And the Woodwind was kind of a really fun exercise for us to kind of go back to our roots, because if we think about where our company came from, where we started, our first product was primarily made from glass. It was very low cost. It worked okay. It proved the concept was viable, but it was glass, it wasn't very durable, and it just didn't have any really appealing looks to it. It was really built primarily for function. But following up from there, the first customers that we had as a company were looking for something more. And it was that looking for something more that was the impetus to create our first modular device. And when I say modular, I mean having some interchangeable components. This first device, kind of out of a little tongue-in-cheek approach, we called it the Thai Woody because it was constructed from a titanium extraction chamber on the hot end, of course, and the stem of the device was made from a good quality hardwood. And so we had this nice combination of metal and wood, which just has a completely different look and feel than glass. It worked, but it was also fraught with a few challenges in the regard that wood, as nice as it is for a finish or for a surface that you're going to touch with your fingers, it's a really challenging material to work with if you're trying to make things really precise. Because, yes, you can machine it precisely with a high-accuracy CNC machine. But then when the humidity changes, so does the wood. Mm-hmm. And this means when you have modular components like we do with our products, they fit really good the day that we make the part. But now you get a more humid day or a few dry days in a row, and all of a sudden things don't fit as good as they used to. And so this is a real challenge for us for the first few years of our company. It even led to us kind of shifting away from wood because it was just difficult to create a consistent product that was consistent for our customers over time and over the seasonal changes. So, in an attempt to kind of go back to our roots, we really decided to take it as a challenge. Okay, can we take what we've learned over the last 5-6 years since we were really kind of more engaged in making the wood devices and modernize it a little bit? Incorporate some of the manufacturing prowess that we've gained through experience and trial and error, and certainly a few failures along the way, and see if we can't bring back a nice piece of wood. And here you go. Here's the woodwind. Kind of the culmination of what we've learned along the way, incorporating some interesting little metal crowns that we call them, to hold the dimensions very, very tightly and accurately, as well as to reinforce what I'd like to refer to as a ridiculously thin wood straw. And now you have this kind of elegant little piece of art that just feels so nice between the fingers and is even balanced, so it just feels right when you hold it.
It does. It really does. I mean, that is exactly, George, how I have felt about it. The curvature of the device, how light it is. And, you know, I'm somebody who likes kind of, you know, post-apocalyptic content where cities get overgrown with forestry, right? And, you know, somebody's walking through like,
nice.
You know, think of, you know, Last of Us or I Am Legend or any one of these sort of dystopian pieces of content. And, you know, it kind of looking at the woodwind and the way that the beautiful wood finish goes up against the metal cap and kind of the like rotating curved metal spines, I guess, that hold the cap in place. It gives me a similar vibe of like nature as well as man-made a tool, you know, the metal up against the wood. And I just think that, as well as, you know, going down to the slight mouthpiece and the fact that the wood doesn't get warm, you know, as you're lighting it, that it doesn't conduct and kind of transfer the heat from the cap to your fingers. I think all of this is really impressive, and just holding it in your fingers and kind of watching all that happen as you use it. I personally have just found the woodwind to be a really pleasurable experience to use.
It does bring a little bit of satisfaction to hold between your fingers, in between your tasting experiences.
Now, very different. You guys have done more since the woodwind. I tried this and that, you know, that was released a while back. And now you have a new product, which is very different from the woodwind, but it's also clearly a step forward. And it kind of touches on the variety that you mentioned earlier in terms of what you're giving your consumers, the options for people in terms of what they want to try. And this newest product is the M7. I'm going to try this out. I haven't had a chance yet, but I'm looking forward to it. And it's clearly, just from a visual standpoint, it's very different from the Woodwind, but it still looks like an improvement from early products. So if you can, talk a little about the M7 and what brought this about.
Okay, so the M7, which might sound a little bit odd if you're not familiar with our products, well, that's kind of a weird name. Well,
like a Bond villain, a little bit.
Yeah, kind of like that, right?
Yeah.
We call it the M7 because it's actually our 7th iteration of our stainless steel kind of, we'll call it middle of the road device, okay? Which, just for simplicity purposes, it was named the M. Back in 2017 is when we brought our first version to market. And since then, it's been a near annual thing for us to give the M a facelift, try and incorporate a few new options or features that we've learned how to do, or listen to some feedback or input from our customers in terms of what they're looking for. How do we make this product more of what people want, right? Because that's what manufacturers are supposed to do, not just make products, right? A manufacturer only earns the opportunity to exist if they consistently design and manufacture products that are interesting and appealing to their customers. So we have to continue to grow and evolve. And this is our next evolution in the M series. It showcases a few of the things that we've learned and developed over the last few years. One of them, which once it lands in your hand here, I think it'll make a lot more sense, is the texture of the finish.
Okay.
So, yes, we've got some CNC machines, and we can make some nice, accurate parts out of the various materials that we machine. Whether it's stainless steel, like the M, wood, like the Woodwind, or titanium, like some of the other components you're going to find on our other devices, including the tip and the mouthpiece on the Woodwind.
For sure.
Okay. But there's limits in terms of textures that can be easily achieved with a standard CNC machine. Whether we're talking about just a simple turned geometry on a cylinder, or milling in some details like you'll find around the airport to make it a bit more tactile and easy to feel with your fingers, so you kind of know where the controls of the device are located without having to necessarily look at them, or if your lighting is not great. Or another way I like to think about it is when you get a bit more familiar with our product after you've used it a few dozen or more times, it starts to become rather familiar and ideally kind of intuitive, that you pick it up, your fingers kind of know where to go because they've been there before. They can follow the path. They can feel their way to the areas of the device that allow you to operate it in the way that you're looking. And that's, again, part of the design, part of the iteration, and part of the form contributing to the function.
Totally. Makes me think of like a commute that you've done over and over again. You get a new job or you start a new class at a school and you drive there for the first time, and it's kind of like, it's clunky. You're looking at the map. You've never taken the route before. And so you're fully engaged with it the entire drive. But then after you've done it 15, 20 times, you go more on autopilot, and you're not so engaged with the thinking of the traveling from point A to B. That's kind of what it makes me think of when you say that once you use the product like the M7, once you use it, a few times, it's like your fingers go right to the spots that that they should be because of the familiarity you've now developed with it.
I think that sums it up really nicely. And I think it's even more important when we think about, to a large degree, what the products that we here at DynaVap manufacture are largely mechanical. Not electronic, mechanical. So the interface between you and the product is like the interface between you and a really nice pen, or say, for example, a surgeon and a scalpel. You become familiar with these things, and you can do some pretty amazing things once that familiarity bond has been created to really achieve what your objective is. Same thing with an artist and a paintbrush. You get a feel for how to use the tools and the instruments that are between your fingers.
Yeah, that's another great example. The artist paintbrush and the surgeon with the scalpel. These handheld tools that we use. Anybody with any function that you've used a handheld tool for, you get kind of what we're talking about here. That familiarity bond that George just mentioned. Like, your proficiency with that tool grows with your familiarity. And something else, George, you just mentioned that I think is key to bring up here is that all your products are not electric. You know, that piece of it, a handheld vaporizer with no battery, no electricity, you just use a heating source like a butane torch or an induction heater and heat the cap. That development, that innovation, which, again, you guys really have allowed a lot of us connoisseurs, you know, people who are enjoying the plant, but, you know, who want to step aside from the combustion side of it. You've made it so easy and a lot more functional and just natural with these products. And I think that freedom from electricity and batteries is another really cool feature of these.
I'm really glad to hear you put it that way. It's been a really important goal for us here at DynaVap to empower the people that are seeking, you know, some of the benefits from their favorite flower. Because although many people do use our products for cannabis, for what it's worth, it is not limited just to cannabis. Because what you have with our products, and it's not just our products, so I want to be as accurate here as I possibly can be. When we're talking about any sort of dry herb vaporizer type product, okay, not talking about a nicotine vape that uses e-liquid. We're talking about products that generally just use botanicals.
Right.
You know, and those botanicals can include some pretty interesting things that I don't think are commonly associated with this type of function. So one that I'd like to mention with conversations like this is hops. Okay, which is actually kind of a close relative to cannabis, but with rather different effects. Of course, most people know hops from beer and more than likely from a good, strong IPA where the hop profile tends to be rather prominent.
For sure.
Well, the interesting thing is you can take raw hop flowers and put them in one of the products that we manufacture, heat your cap until it clicks, and effectively get the flavor profile of a nice IPA without taking a sip.
Wow.
And the effect profile when thermally extracting hops, and you know, I'll dwell on that term a little bit more later if you like, because I think thermal extraction it's kind of a descriptive term, and it helps to differentiate a little bit the process that products like ours use versus the term vaping, for example.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
So when you heat up, you know, a DynaVap product and you thermally extract some of the compounds, what you're going to find is that the material that I put inside the oven here, it smells and it tastes a whole lot like it smells when I just smell it in raw form. And why is that? Well, it's actually pretty simple in the regard that we're just baking our flowers, just like you'd bake some fresh cookies.
Love that.
And when we bake cookies, right, our whole kitchen smells like fresh baked cookies. And then when we take those cookies out of the oven, they kind of taste like fresh baked cookies. And, you know, here this is what I think many people have found to be kind of a good description to help communicate the difference between smoking and thermal extraction. You know, some people call it vaping, but I don't care to use that term as much because it's heavily confused with the nicotine and e-liquid pods, disposable vapes, and that sort of industry. Right. Which is very, very different from a DynaVap product, which is effectively a portable oven that allows you to bake your cookies instead of burning them.
That's a really well articulated analogy, and I love it. And I'm glad you kind of explained that distinction, because when you put it that way, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is this kind of giant vaping industry now, which does feature liquid capsules and a lot of nicotine products, and it's just it's a completely different it's a different product, different experience for the user, but then it's also a different process in terms of how that's extracted, how that's inhaled, and all of this. And I think thinking of these DynaVap products as portable ovens and using the term thermal extraction, for instance, versus vaping, I think that is a really important distinction to make, because it can be confusing. I think for people whether you're going to stores or shopping online, when you're looking for cannabis products and you go into a store that's advertising vapes, I know I've in other states, I've gone into markets or I've gone into dispensaries and stuff, and thinking that it's a cannabis product when actually they're like, oh no, these are all nicotine. And it's disappointing. It's just disappointing to go in there expecting one thing, and then they're like, hey, actually, this is not what you thought.
Well, there's one more reason why I like to make this distinction whenever I practically can, and that is there's not only misunderstanding for people like you and me that are seeking products like this, there's also misunderstanding from people that are trying to regulate products like this.
Right.
And this can cause, and certainly has caused, not a small amount of problems because of, I'm going to say, either unintended or misaligned regulation. Because when we're trying to regulate a vape, because we don't want the kids getting hooked on nicotine when they're in high school, well, what does that have to do with a portable oven for baking your cookies instead of burning them?
Right.
We're talking about two completely different product categories that perform very, very different functions, yet there's this confusion in our marketplace and in our society by calling both of these products vapes when they're very, very different.
That's another great point. I mean, this is you get into the weeds of regulation too, and we're still just getting the framework going. I mean, I say it on the show all the time. Each state in the U.S. that legalizes is like its own island in terms of laws and regulations, because there is no federal policy. There's no umbrella federal cannabis policy other than the prohibition of it. And so. Right. When we move forward, and we do have states legalized, we are at this moment kind of at the dawn of just regulating these products. You make a great point that the fact that this confusion exists, and that extends to those regulators, we don't want, when this, hopefully, as we keep waiting for, whether it's safer banking or the DEA finally making an announcement on rescheduling or whatever, when we do move into a place where there is a federal regulation, we want it to start from the right place, not come out of the gate with like confusion, and you're conflating two different products and two different substances as well.
Yes. Fun little side note, because I think it's really worthwhile mentioning here. Today's actually an incredibly impactful day that I don't think many people, at least in this country, realize. But today is the day that cannabis is no longer criminal in Germany.
Yes. Yeah, we're recording this April 1st, listener, and that was nothing to do with April Fools here. Germany has officially, partially, but legalized cannabis. And George, you're totally right. It's a major, major day.
Yeah, I really hope that this is going to accelerate the whole process and maybe even be a turning point, because with Germany being one of the largest economies in Europe, and kind of one of those countries that sets the precedent in many regards for what the other countries in that part of the world do, it seems likely that there's going to be not a small number of additional countries finally deciding to follow suit and maybe take a different look and a different approach to what's been taken so far, that I think from many people's perspectives and opinions just generally has not worked well.
Yeah, and on that note, I mean, it is exciting. Germany is definitely a big domino, to your point. Like, they are a big player in that part of the world, and a lot of countries do look to what they're doing. A lot of countries, owe them money because fiscally. So there's that. They have that control over a lot of countries. But culturally, I think that they just have a lot of weight. In terms of what they do, I think it is as I say, it's a domino where, as you just pointed out, it feels like, hopefully anyway, other countries will take their cue. We've already had medically, you have countries like Ukraine, you have Thailand, you have had some movement on that front, but none of them have as large a footprint as somebody like Germany does. And to your point, George, I was just reading earlier today that France is now looking into, they haven't made an announcement yet, but at least medically, they're considering moving cannabis into a more regulated category as well. And there's no doubt in my mind that has to do with Germany.
For sure. And I'm just hopeful that it'll be good for our business as well. Because one of the things that, to kind of bring things full circle, that was one of the primary driving factors in the early days of this company was to provide people that elect to use cannabis an option that allows them to consume in a little bit more of a friendly to themselves, friendly to others, and friendlier to the environment, as well as, forgive me if this comes across inappropriate, but maybe even a bit more respectful to the plant, to bake instead of burn, and really empower these people to have a better overall experience that carries fewer detrimental effects to their health. And we wanted to do it in such a way where we could provide these options at a cost that was very approachable or achievable by just about anyone. So making a reasonably priced thermal extraction device, and not just reasonably priced in terms of what it costs to buy it, but reasonably priced in terms of how long it lasts.
Right.
And you can further subdivide this, and forgive me if I'm rambling on a bit, by
no, not at all.
Efficiency, right? It's very common, at least feedback that we receive from our customers, that when they start using our products to bake instead of burn, that the quantity of material that they're consuming drops substantially, in many cases by more than 50%. And when we think about the entry level, right? Take the M7, kind of our mid-level device, because we have other devices that are even more cost-effective, like the B, for example.
Right.
But if you take the M7 at $75 US, and if you can even reduce the amount that you're consuming comfortably by 25 to 30%, okay, well, so if it saves you $10 to $20 a month, well, this device pays for itself in a few months. And for some people that consume a bit more than that, it can pay for itself inside of 1 month. Yet the device itself is very, very durable and realistically should last for decades. Possibly need to replace a few O-rings, and maybe if, whatever circumstance, you can lose the cap, you can step on it. Occasionally they wear out, but for the most part they tend to last for years and years and years, and thousands and thousands and thousands of cycles. This product can become an incredibly good investment, paying for itself many, many times over. And in exchange for it paying for itself, the person that uses the device gets the benefit of inhaling fewer toxins and having an overall healthier lifestyle.
Right. You said a lot of great stuff there, George, and I want to first confirm in my own use that I can totally agree that 50% savings of the material you're using, that seems right to me, because I noticed when I started using the first one, the B product of DynaVap that I tried first, and then rolling on with the Woodwind, I would say that I'm using somewhere between 30 and 50% less than I was before. I just noticed that the pace that I was going through my supply slowed down significantly. I mean, it's a noticeable difference. So that's a big thing.
Isn't that fun?
It is.
And it's not because you're trying to reduce it, though.
Right. No, not at all.
It just happens.
Exactly. It just happens. And so that's wonderful in itself. And when you talk about those savings that equates to, I mean, obviously we just said different states, have different markets regarding cannabis. Here in Illinois, where I am, I think these DynaVap products would pay for themselves in about a weekend, because there are as anybody here knows, it's expensive. I think there was some report that put Illinois cannabis as like the most expensive in the country. So it's here, especially, listener, you really owe it to yourself to try out these DynaVap products, because George is not just blowing smoke here. This is absolutely this is true. You're using less of your product by thermally extracting than you are when you torch it, when you're burning these things.
But it's not because you're going on a diet, and I think that's worth dwelling on a little bit too.
Right. Absolutely.
At least it's been in my experience, but I think it'd be good to hear yours, that you're only consuming less because you don't feel like you want anymore.
Yeah, it's what it is too, is that it is interesting to talk about. Like I myself, on a typical evening, I might smoke, 2 or 3 bowls, or when I was burning, right? So I'll pack, whether it's a bowl or a bong or whatever I'm using. I'm more of a bowl or a joint person typically, but when I pack the glass, it's call it not even a quarter of a gram, maybe a fifth or a sixth, just a little bit of a pinch of a smaller nug. But once you burn it, then it's just gone. Maybe the bowl gives you 5 or 6 hits, depending on the size of it. Maybe it gives you 10 to 12. But as you burn it, then it just becomes ash, and you dump it out of the bowl. Whereas packing this Woodwind, for instance, as I just said, I might pack 2 or 3 bowls on an evening before going to bed. For the Woodwind itself, I pack the cap full, which is probably less weed than would go into my bowl anyway, just because the cap it's just smaller. And so I'll pack that, and then I thermally extract, and I taste, the cannabis strain tastes wonderful, but it's also that I take longer to get through the one capful with the Woodwind, and then maybe I use it twice. So already that's like less than the 3 bowls I would have packed. And not only that, I have not burned the flower. So I just dump out the cap, and I've taken to kind of keeping the thermally extracted flower in a different jar. And then basically when I have enough, when I've filled up that jar with flower that I have used through the products here, my wife will try and usually bake something with it. She'll use it again to bake some cookies or brownies or whatever for me to ingest. She's currently 9 months pregnant, so it's just for me. But
nice.
Yeah, it totally. And she's wonderful with it. But to your point, George, just one evening, and kind of extrapolating how that plays out, and the ability to use your flower. A, I'm inhaling less of it per session, but then B, I get to use it again once I've inhaled, I can still use it. My wife makes ingestibles with it, consumables. You're getting twice as much out of the same supply that you had if you're burning it. So in my experience, what you're saying about the efficiency here, it absolutely plays out this way.
Kind of fun, isn't it? It's like, okay, buy this thing for $100 and your car will get twice as many miles per gallon as long as you own it.
That's a great. It's a great analogy. It's going twice as far with the same supply. Let me stray a little bit, because you brought up the health benefits before too, and kind of how almost DynaVap products allow connoisseurs like myself to have even a more respectful and healthier experience, using the plant. I'll tell you this. I hadn't thought of bringing this up, but now when you said that, it kind of reminded me of it. Recently, I went to see an allergist, somebody, ear, nose, and throat. I had some, the seasons changed. I had some congestion that just wouldn't go away. So I went to go see a specialist about it, and, gave me some decongestant. We talked about things, and they asked, we talked about cannabis, and they mentioned to me, like, do you notice flare-ups after with smoking and whatnot? And weirdly enough, as long as I've smoked and been somebody enthusiast about this, I never thought about that. Even though it's a plant with the same residue of pollen and the same weed and like the same stuff that's out there that causes us to sneeze when the seasons change, that some of that stuff is still there in like the flower, but it just never occurred to me that would be affecting my sinuses and like my breathing and stuff like that. And so she brought that up to me, and I kept that in mind over the last few weeks, maybe month or so, about something like 4 to 6 weeks. And I have used the woodwind more in that time. And something I noticed, and I don't know if this has come up from any other users, George, but something I've noticed is that my congestion and my like sinus response to thermal extraction versus combustion is also a major improvement. I'm not getting the same kind of congestion. I'm not getting the same clogging of my breathing that I would oftentimes when I'm combusting and burning the flower the way that I always had. And that is a major quality of life improvement.
I think it's a major one. And it's one that just doesn't seem to get much attention. Because why? Well, because for reasons that I'm struggling to understand, it doesn't seem like it's being studied. And part of that, of course, is the legality of things, the rules, the laws, etc. Our federal government that, considers cannabis to be of no medicinal value, etc.
Right.
So we're just not seeing these things, although there are more and more studies finally happening, especially as, states decided to go against the federal government and legalize anyway. But now that we have this more open market, I'm really looking forward to seeing some studies that actually compare the differences between combustion versus thermal extraction. So if you happen to know someone that's interested in doing that, or the university or whatever, please send them my way. I'd be happy to contribute or to participate, with product, etc.
Right on.
Because I think there's something here that I feel strongly could really benefit a significant number of people. And that's been kind of at the core of why this business exists, is not just to make products and make money. No, actually it's that's a side benefit if we're making products that people enjoy. The primary driving factor was really to provide a more health conscious and considerate manner of consuming these types of products, for the person that's consuming them, the people around them, the environment, and even respect for the plant itself, because you're not lighting it on fire. And I'll elaborate on that for just one little more. Name another medicine that you light on fire to consume it.
That's a really great question. I've never thought of it that way, but when you ask that question, it's kind of a hilarious just supposition, right? Like it's just a hilarious illustration that's not how we medicate ourselves.
Go to the pharmacy, okay, and buy something else that's not tobacco, of course.
Yeah.
That's medicine. Yeah, you're going to take it home, put it in your pipe, and light it? I don't think so. Your doctor's going to prescribe you something that, here, burn 3 of these and inhale the smoke.
Right. That's not. It's not the doctors that have ever prescribed it that way. Exactly. It's just not the way we do it.
But we consider cannabis to be medicine, yet we burn it.
No, I'm glad you said that. I mean, and when you say the others around them too, that makes me think of something where, I went back in the days pre-legalization, the Wild West of just black market cannabis, when no states had yet legalized, and you'd walk around a city, maybe it's the one that you live in, maybe you're traveling, and you get a whiff of cannabis out in the wild. And I remember, there was a time in my life when it was like, hey, that's cool. Because it was kind of like, again, it was still illegal. So it was like spotting somebody else, a member of a secret club, it was the same thing as like meeting somebody at a party before it was legal. And you were like, once you met them and you found out they smoked, it was like, oh, all of a sudden you're friends because you just leapfrog all of this awkwardness because you're like, oh, you smoke, I smoke. Okay, cool. We can at least agree on that. And that's kind of a big thing. And smelling it was like a shadow version of that. But nowadays, even myself, when I walk around like downtown Chicago or when I was recently visiting California, just different places that you go about. My wife was in Denver recently. We go around these cities that have legalized and the smell of weed is now pretty much everywhere. Like it is pervasive all over the place. Yeah,
it is.
And I'm somebody who likes it, but even to me, I have found you don't want to be smelling that all the time. It's just not pleasant.
And that's debatable.
It is, certainly, yeah.
Because, again, pleasant, unpleasant, well, it depends on the person, right?
Subjective,
but
yes.
The way that, again, opinion here, my personal opinion is on liberty is I believe that people should be able to do whatever they choose, provided it doesn't negatively impact anyone else or the environment.
Right.
Well, if you're not a person that appreciates the way that smells, well, then the person that's creating that is negatively affecting you. And agree or disagree, I just don't think it's if it's avoidable, right? Why do it? Why negatively affect someone else if we could make a simple choice to not do so? And when we thermally extract versus burn, the odor factor is reduced by a pretty massive degree, both consuming inside and outside. I don't know what your situation is at home, but if you're going to consume where you live inside, if you're smoking, well, now your residence is going to smell like you're smoking for a long time.
Yes.
But when you bake your cookies instead of burning them, you get a little bit of the aroma, but in general, it dissipates and is effectively undetectable within a few hours.
Yes. And on that note, I'll share another tidbit from inside my household here. Since the last trimester, my wife's in, as I said, she's we got 4 weeks left here. Since her third trimester, she has really been not a fan of the smell of cannabis. And so it has put me in a position of like, all right, if I'm smoking, now I go outside and that's the end of it. However, because of the woodwind and because of the other DynaVap that I have here, I have been able to utilize that still inside on cold or rainy days. And it is not nearly as offensive to her. She doesn't even bring it up. And that right there illustrates the distinction where the same person, same indoor space, all of that, the smoking is very offensive to her and the thermal extraction is not. And so, again, to your point, I have seen the validity of that firsthand very recently.
That's a fantastic story. And one of the better examples I've come across recently. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, my pleasure. And I'm glad before, too, when you were talking about the liberty, I totally agree with you there. I feel the same. I believe people should be able to do what makes them happy, provided they're not harming or negatively impacting somebody else. And this debate about where smoking's okay, and the smell of it and all of that, we're really, especially as states legalize it, this is starting to become a contentious issue where people are allowed to imbibe or ingest, I guess, cannabis, where people are allowed to smoke or burn the plant. That, compared with other forms of leisure like drinking or something else, there's not such an odor that accompanies that could potentially offend others in the vicinity. And so as we do legalize and we are making this more normal and people are going to be ingesting this and whether it's smoking or thermally extracting, this question of, are you offending someone else who would rather not smell that? As you said, it's debatable. Some people like it, some don't. But what matters is, if you like it, your right to use it doesn't weigh any more or less than this other person's right to not smell it because they don't want to.
In this, I completely agree. So we're talking about just simple consideration for the other fellow occupants of our planet here.
Yeah, exactly. And on that note, I just think that, George, the work that you have done and that you're continuing to do at DynaVap, which is making the potential for thermal extraction just so much more widespread. You're giving everyone so much more access and ease with which they can enjoy thermal extraction, and just kind of making this a more viable possibility out there. And I want to congratulate you on the great work you've done, and I really just look forward to what you guys are going to continue to do in the future.
Well, we aspire to find new ways to innovate what we do and hopefully push that envelope. And it helps a whole lot when we connect with people like you, Don, where we can help grow that awareness that, okay, so you like to have a little cannabis. All right. Well, did you know that you can have effectively all of the benefits of having a little smoke break without the smoke? That you can bake your cookies instead of burning them, and you might actually enjoy it. And I'm not saying that it's better, so hopefully it don't come across that way. It's just simply another option that we found that when people see it as an option and explore it, they might find that, oh, you know what? Yeah, I still like having my joints. But when I'm at home, I can actually sit on the couch and watch a movie with my significant other, and they don't mind when I thermally extract versus burn.
Yeah.
Got to go outside to smoke, but yeah, you can use that when you're sitting right next to me and I don't mind.
Yeah.
And so it can just be another option to get a little bit more enjoyment out of life.
Right on, man. And I just, more options, the better. I think that we see that in life in general. And as I keep saying, as this green wave keeps moving and as cannabis, hopefully as it keeps becoming normalized, becomes a more regular part of everyday life in society, stuff like this, the ability to, whether people find it better or worse, as you say, that is subjective, but giving people the options and the ability to enjoy these things in more parts of their lives or in more locations or among more people, more crowds, so that they don't have to necessarily dip away or go outside or sort of affect or change their behavior so significantly to continue with this activity. Now, with products like what DynaVap is making and just spreading thermal extraction around, you're giving people more options of ways to fold this into their lives and their daily routines, as well as the other benefits we talked about too, like the durability, the flavor. I mean, we hardly even touched on that this talk, but the difference in burning versus thermal extraction in terms of flavor is more than significant. I mean, it's massive. And then the efficiency and how portable it is, as well as the fun, artistic, comfortable part of holding something like the woodwind. There are many reasons, listener, why you should do yourself a favor and head to DynaVap.com and check out some of these products. And, consider, if you haven't already, go ahead and give thermal extraction a try. And I think you'll find, like I have, that this definitely has a place in your life, and it may open some doors for you or kind of expand your options for cannabis use.
There is one more fun thing to kind of add into this mix. Yeah. And that is, when we explore the option of baking instead of burning, we end up with the ability to explore the entire spectrum of what the plant has to offer. And what I mean by that is, when you burn, you either burn or you don't. There's not a way to kind of half burn.
Right.
Okay. So it's very binary. But when you bake, you can have ooey gooey cookies, or you can have crispy crunchy cookies, or anywhere in between. And to be a bit more specific, when you just heat your cannabis, for example, just to the point where it's starting to produce a little bit of flavor, you are able to selectively extract a rather different spectrum of compounds and produce a noticeably and sometimes profoundly different effect than when you take the exact same strain and you heat it to a much higher temperature and you fully extract it, giving you the option to really fine-tune your experience, even with the exact same strain of flower, by simply modifying how you heat the device and to what temperature.
Yeah, that too. It's just getting back to the more options thing. I mean, that ability to, as you say, kind of escape the binary nature of burning or not burning, and giving yourself more options of the spectrum that thermal extraction has available. That's another way where, like, whatever you like specifically, this gives you the ability, more opportunities to get that exact experience. And certainly, I think that's always worth exploring.
Fun stuff, isn't it?
It is. George, I could talk with you about this all day, my man. It's always fascinating to get your take on these things and just kind of talk about cannabis and life and certainly thermal extraction and the excellent work you guys are doing at DynaVap. But I really, we'll wrap it up there, and I really, really appreciate you taking some time and sharing some of this stuff with us today, because this is just a lot of positive things to think about and some great opportunities for people to go and check out, like these new products like the M7.
It's been a really enjoyable experience. I appreciate you for having me on the show. Thanks a bunch, Don.
And there you have it, listener. I want to thank one more time my guest, George Brewa, founder of DynaVap. It's always such a pleasure to speak with him. Obviously, very knowledgeable but passionate about cannabis, but specifically that thermal extraction of the flower versus combustion. And I just am so thrilled whenever he brings up that perspective about how different and all the benefits of using thermal extraction versus combustion really is. And I've got to say, I've been loving my DynaVap products. I gushed about the woodwind because I really have been enjoying it. They're easy to clean. I did get an M7 from George as well. I'm going to give that a try. I haven't had a chance to try it yet, but I'll talk a little about that in my next episode. But in the meantime, if you haven't tried some of these DynaVap products and you would like to, I would like to announce right now that the Cannabis Man podcast is hosting its very first giveaway. This is not really a contest of sorts, it's mainly a giveaway, but what you need to do if you are interested in getting one of the B products from DynaVap, head to DynaVap.com, check out their website if you don't know what the bee is. I am also going to share pictures of it on the show's social media pages at C-Man Podcast on X and Instagram, and it's the Cannabis Man Podcast Facebook and YouTube pages. Check out the bee, see kind of what we're working with here, and if that interests you, scroll down and click on the Support the Show link. It'll take you to Buzzsprout.com and become a subscriber to the Cannabis Man Podcast. You have different options for your monthly support, and you can cancel anytime. So there's no need to do it for multiple months. I'm not doing this giveaway based on a 3 or a 6 month support thing. All you need to do is become a subscriber, even if it's just for 1 month. And then I will reach out to you. I will get your shipping information, and I will get this bee out to you. I also have some butane torches courtesy of DynaVap. I've got 2 of those that I will also be giving away. So there are 2 bee thermal extraction products, and there are 2 butane torches. If you are interested in getting any of those shipped to you, click on the Support the Show link, become a subscriber to the Cannabis Man Podcast, support the show. Any monthly amount is fine. I don't even care whatever it is. But just go ahead and do that, and you will be in the running to get one of these DynaVap products. Now, on to one news story that, of course, I had to bring up this week. This is not an April Fool's story, even though the news did officially break on April 1st. We discussed it a little in the interview George and I did, but this is some major news. Germany has officially legalized possession of small amounts of cannabis. Yeah. Deutschland. Uber. Uber. Yeah. Kind of makes me think of Mario Kart, actually. You know, whenever you'd win a race and you're there on the, on the podium at the end, if you won one of the top three, standing next to Peach and Yoshi. Good stuff. Well done, Germany. Very, very proud of you. Very happy for you. Very happy for all the German citizens who are now going to be able to partake. Monday was the first day that it legalized small amounts of cannabis for recreational use. This was over objections from doctors and police, some of them anyway, in the country. The German Cannabis Association, which campaigned for the new law, staged a smoke-in at Berlin's landmark Brandenburg Gate when the law took effect at midnight. Other public consumption events were scheduled throughout the country on Monday, including one in front of the Cologne Cathedral and others in Hamburg, Regensburg, and Dortmund. Germany now is the third European Union country to legalize cannabis for personal use after Malta and Luxembourg. The government argued legalization would undermine criminal trade in the drug, guard against harmful impurities, and free police to pursue more serious crimes while providing for protections against use by those under 18 years old. The new law legalizes possession by adults of up to 25 grams, nearly an ounce, which we know is 28 grams, of marijuana for recreational purposes, and it also allows individuals to grow up to 3 plants on their own at home. Use is prohibited within 100 meters of the entrance to a playground or school. That part of the legislation took effect on Monday as well. And here's an interesting twist. German residents, those 18 and older, will be allowed to join nonprofit cannabis clubs with a maximum 500 members each starting July 1st. Individuals will be allowed to buy up to 25 grams per day or a maximum of 50 grams per month, a figure limited to 30 grams for people under the age of 21. Membership in multiple clubs will not be allowed. The club's costs will be covered by membership fees, which are to be staggered according to how much cannabis members use. So I think the idea of cannabis clubs is pretty cool, and it seems like the ability, it seems like whatever you're charged for membership is going to depend on how much cannabis you consume. That's all I will read of this article. It's from the Associated Press. I have shared the article. I've linked it down below in the show description notes. You can click on it if you want to read the rest of it and get some more details about the nuances of this legalization in Germany. Now on to another news story. This one just came out this week as well, Tuesday, April 2nd. And this one is back on this side of the Atlantic. Here in the United States, the state of Georgia has passed a hemp bill imposing age limits on CBD, Delta-8 THC, and Delta-9 THC, and that bill is heading to the governor's desk, set to be signed next week. This is from the publication MJ Biz Daily. This article written by staff, and I've linked it down below if you want to follow along or read for yourself later. Georgia is set to prohibit sales of hemp-derived cannabinoid products to anybody under the age of 21, including goods containing CBD, as well as intoxicating synthetically derived cannabinoids such as Delta-8 THC and Delta-9 THC. The new age restrictions for consumers, as well as new registration and testing requirements for hemp cultivators and producers, are all part of a bill passed by the State General Assembly. The so-called Georgia Hemp Farming Act, titled Senate Bill 494, now heads to Republican Governor Brian Kemp to be signed into law. Lawmakers in Georgia have sought to regulate hemp-derived products in the state since the 2018 Farm Bill led to a flood of unregulated products derived from hemp. That's something I've talked about on this show before. I've talked about all the pop-up shops here around Chicago, around where I live, and I spoke about this with my friends at S3 Collective, David Valencourt and Alina Rodriguez. They are working on federal standards just like this one to deal with the unregulated products derived from hemp, which are those that you find in these pop-up shops. This is all stuff that comes not from dispensaries. This is the stuff that comes from the pop-up shops, and these are the cannabinoid derivatives. Also worth noting, Georgia does have a medical marijuana program, but only low THC cannabis oil is allowed. State Bill 494 would also close the so-called THCA loophole by redefining Delta-9 THC. Product makers and merchants in some states have claimed that some products are actually hemp because they contain THCA. THCA is THC's biosynthetic precursor that must be heated in order to be converted into THC. So you can kind of see how that goes with some of these hemp products. You can understand how some producers would use such a loophole to basically have products with THCA, but then once it's heated up, it becomes THC. And this is one of those nuances that is not really understood by regulators. It's kind of one of those things like the difference between vaping and thermal extraction that George and I were talking about earlier. These people who are regulating this don't often understand the details and the nuances of these products and the way these substances work in our systems. So that's the end of the article there. Again, I encourage you to read it from MJ Biz Daily. It's linked down below. And one more story for you before I let you go this week, listener. This one's kind of a fun one. Washington, D.C. Council approves 420 medical marijuana tax holiday. I was just talking about how exciting and special this particular 420 is going to be. Well, if you are around Baltimore or the Washington, D.C. area, you have an additional reason to celebrate. Leaders in D.C. have approved legislation to suspend taxes on medical marijuana around the 420 cannabis celebration, declaring a tax holiday on purchases from April 15th through the 28th. So it's not just that day. You're looking at almost 2 weeks here of tax-free medical marijuana purchases. The District Council approved the tax holiday unanimously on a voice vote on Tuesday, also taking action on a number of other cannabis-related proposals, just like proposed dispensary buffer zones around schools in commercial and industrial zones. The legislation also extends the period of validity for medical marijuana patient and caregiver registration cards to 6 years and clarifies the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Administration's ABCA authority to close down unlicensed and unregulated retailers. The change authorizes ABCA to, quote, summarily close an unlicensed retailer where the continued operations of the unlicensed retailer presents an imminent danger to the health, safety, or welfare of the public. This came from a letter to the council. An amendment also adopted unanimously by them adjusted language in an effort to ensure ABCA has the ability to investigate licensed medical marijuana businesses as well. In addition to encouraging patients to stay within DC's regulated medical cannabis system, the letter says the tax holiday bill also supports the medical marijuana industry. This happened before in 2022, a bill designed to help address rising cannabis costs at licensed dispensaries and fight the continuing threat posed by illicit cannabis storefronts and delivery services. Members of the panel said roughly 200 unlicensed dispensaries currently exist in the district, and about 70 of those have applied to transition into the regulated market. In a separate action Tuesday, the council also defeated a proposal that would have adjusted rules around locating medical marijuana dispensaries near schools. Members also considered a measure to extend the district's cannabis enforcement authority while Congress reviews a regulation bill adopted by the council earlier this year. Retailers already have to be 300 feet from schools or rec centers, but a recent policy exempts certain medical cannabis retailers from that requirement if they are located in a commercial or industrial zone. That is where this change, this slight adjustment of this one approved on Tuesday comes from. I'll leave it there. This is an article from our friends at Marijuana Moment published by Ben Adlin on Wednesday, April 3rd. I have linked this below, and I highly encourage you, as always, to check out Marijuana Moment and join and subscribe to their newsletter and support them in any way you can, because they're a great publication. A lot of good information coming out of there. And that's where I'll leave it this week, listener. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank my guest, George Brewa, for jumping on the show, as always. Remember to become a subscriber, and you can get one of those products from DynaVap that I mentioned earlier. And as always, follow the show at C-Man Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, the Cannabis Man Podcast Facebook page and YouTube channel. And next week, I have another great guest interview for you. I'm talking with somebody who is about to expand into the international market, opening operations in Thailand. And they are, yes, very much looking forward to getting involved with Germany as well, now that they have officially gone legal. And in light of that, as I talked about with George, much. Germany is a big domino to fall culturally in the EU, and I guarantee you other countries are going to follow suit, and there's another country, a big one, already looking at what Germany has done and is apparently considering medical marijuana for themselves. I will tell you about that story next week. In the meantime, have yourself a wonderful and safe weekend. Enjoy the Eclipse if you're celebrating. Head on down to the eve of the Eclipse Carnival in Carbondale. Maybe I'll see you over there. And either way, just enjoy yourself and time with your family and just enjoy it out there. As I say, life is too short. Go ahead, blaze a joint, and as long as you're not hurting anybody else, do things that make you happy and spend time with the people that mean the most to you. Take care, and we'll talk next week on the Cannabis Man Podcast. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is 100% originally crafted by myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music written and composed by Yusu Kim, aka Good Son.